All right, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen, welcome to another exciting episode of Under the Dome. I'm your host, Alan Ulrich, with my partner, Sean Williams. How you doing tonight, Sean?
Doing fantastic, man. Is it football season yet?
Not quite. The title of the episode is Urgent, so now I have Foreigner playing in my head for a while. I did see Foreigner when they were on tour for Foreigner 4. Yeah, you're right. Well, I did see Foreigner. It was actually Agent Provocateur album tour. It was in 1985. Ooh. It wasn't Foreigner 4, but it was a damn good concert though. Really, really good concert. I don't care if
I saw them. I saw them on the 4 tour.
Mm. Yeah, I missed
and the opening song was Jukebox Hero,
really?
And my life changed forever.
Well, the opening song when I saw them, because they opened the Cajun Dome in Lafayette, they were the first rock concert in the Cajun Dome because it opened in 1985. Was Feels Like the First Time. So it was a really, really good show. Really, really good show. Oh, they had a
Are you familiar with the 80s? Are you familiar with the 80s band Firehouse?
Yes.
Baby,
yes.
Don't you be bad. Okay.
Yes.
CJ Snare, the lead singer of Firehouse, still to this day considers his one of their concerts at the Cajun Dome to be the very best concert that Firehouse ever had.
I have friends who were at that show, and it was an interesting conversation that they had about it. But yeah, I saw quite a few shows at the Cajun Dome. I saw ZZ Top's Recycler tour. I saw George Strait out there. I saw
boy, there's a opposite end to this.
Yeah, I saw who the hell else? I saw Richard Marx there. I saw Chicago there. I saw a lot of concerts. I saw Bo Diddley at the Blackham Coliseum in Lafayette.
I saw Percy Sledge.
A fun show. That was a fun show, actually. You'd think, that was when Bo Diddley was kind of having his rebound return when he was doing the Bo Jackson commercials. And, Bo, you don't know Diddley. Yeah. And I saw the Fabulous Thunderbirds there, too, with Jimmy Vaughn, Stevie Ray Vaughan's brother.
I still remember the day that Stevie Ray died.
I do, too.
I was sitting on a cotton picker. And there was a break on the radio station.
How did the cotton picker feel about that?
Well, it was a bad day all around.
Yeah, I was actually in college journalism class when I heard that Stevie Ray Vaughan died. So, and I was playing the hell out of In Step.
And on that note, we want to thank everyone for joining us tonight on Under the Dome. We want to thank our sponsors, Fan First Productions, for having the infinite wisdom to put us on the map. And we want to invite everyone to subscribe to our YouTube and iTunes channel. And we're going to segue quickly into our final seasonal positional unit evaluation. This week, we're going to focus on special teams. And rather than going through, as we did previously with the other units where we isolate a most valuable player, obviously, there's only 3 real specialty players that are worthy of note. And that would be Zach Wood, the long snapper, which today was extended on his contract. And the best punter in the game, in my opinion, in Thomas Morstead. And the man who stopped the kicking carousel in the Crescent City, Will Lutz. Let's start with Will Lutz.
Okay.
Could there be any guy in this league that was more clutch than Will Lutz this year?
It's funny, but I can think of quite a few people, especially last year, who in the beginning of the season, who really were not happy that the Saints signed Will Lutz, and they felt like, what kind of team do we have that we're going after basically the Baltimore Ravens cast off? And then you had the blocked extra point, blocked two blocked field goal attempts, and so forth. And people were kind of really down on Lutz. And very quietly, he had one of the best seasons the Saints kicker has had since at least 2011 when we had John Casey. So I like him a lot. I think he is a young, solid kicker who's just getting better and better, and we're seeing a greater emphasis on special teams. So we're seeing a much more consistent production out of him. He's learning. And we've put an end to the carousel. So it's to me, it's a great, I guess to say great position to be in right now. We don't have to worry about the special teams. We've got a great kicker. We got a great punter. And very quietly went through 3 long snappers, one because of health issues. And we didn't have a low snap, a bad snap. We didn't have, poor blocking right in the middle. We didn't have any of those things that we had in previous years. So,
and if you take into consideration the year that we had before last year before last, I guess, the Carolina game, the Denver game, above all, special teams was the very bane of our existence.
Mm-hmm.
And it's such a dramatic turnaround. You have not only Will Lutz, who, were it not for the way that last 10, 15 seconds played out in Minnesota, would have made the most clutch kick since Garrett Hartley in the NFC Championship game several years ago. And on the other side of the coin, you have Thomas Morstead, who consistently flips the field for that defense and puts the opponent's offense inside of the 20, inside of the 10. Great hang time, coverage team, all there. And I would be remiss without mentioning players like Chris Banjo. Who is the other guy?
You're talking about Justin Hardy?
Justin Hardy. Why couldn't I remember? Hardy's a great restaurant.
And our third string quarterback, Taysom Hill, who turned out to be a hell of a special teamer.
No. That's not the third string quarterback. That is the future of our franchise.
Yeah.
We'll get into that later.
Yes.
I'm being sarcastic, obviously. But anyway, if there was, I believe you and I have talked about this, and we are in agreement that if there was any deficiency whatsoever in the special teams, it had to be punt return and kick return.
Yep. Yeah, especially especially punt return. We got better at kick return once we put Alvin Kamara back there. But I don't know if you want Kamara back there returning kickoffs all the time. No. But right now, he's your best kick returner. That is our biggest weakness is punt and kick return. We need to find that Tyrone Hughes, that Michael Lewis, somebody who we can trust back there and is just a big play waiting to happen. And that's hard to get. I mean, if you really think about it, you go through that list, it's hard to draft somebody purely to play special teams for you as a returner, especially drafting pretty high. Brian Mitchell from UL, old friend of mine. I can't think of the Bears guy right now. It just slipped my mind.
Hester.
Devin Hester. I had Justin Hardy's name stuck in my head, but Devin Hester from the U. He was also drafted fairly high. So, I mean, it's hard to dedicate a draft pick purely to play special teams, because despite what you saw with Hester in Atlanta, despite what you saw towards the end of his time in Chicago, he was a kick returner. That's his job. He didn't do anything else. It's like having you only have 45 guys active on game day. You're now forced to play one guy, another guy. So you're talking about 3 specialists already, but you're now talking about 4 specialists on game day out of your 45-man roster, whose their only job is to play special teams. That's really hard for a team to allocate that kind of space on the roster for a guy who can only do one thing. That's why you see people try receivers out there. They try running backs out there, cornerbacks out there. They want to find somebody who can do 2 and 3 things, so you don't lose an active roster spot for somebody who you need as a backup. So yeah, that is a weakness. That's why it's a weakness. It's why it's so hard to find somebody.
Well, the easy answer at this point, especially after that his showing in that playoff game, the easy answer would be to put Alvin Kamara back there to return kicks. As long as you have Mark Ingram in the backfield, that's not as significant an issue as it is otherwise. But thinking in terms of the future, I don't think that it's too far out of the realm of understanding that Alvin Kamara is at this point being looked at as the future of our New Orleans Saints backfield. Mm-hmm. And with that being said, every time you put him out there returning kicks, that puts that in jeopardy. And arguably one of Mark Ingram's most successful, healthy, and productive seasons this past year, and you could say the same thing about Kamara, came when the two of those players worked in conjunction with one another. And you take one out of the equation, and the other is going to suffer for that. Maybe not in the next game, but long-term, down the road, it's going to wear thin. And you put Kamara back there, that's just too much of a risk. The reward is great. And people say, well, Darren Sproles did. Well, Darren Sproles also played in a backfield where you had, oh Lord, I drew a blank.
You're talking about when Sproles was returning kicks. He had Pierre Thomas, who also returned kicks. Cadet. Well, even before Cadet, you had Chris Ivory and you had Mark Ingram. Oh, you had, if you go back to 2009, you had Mike Bell and Pierre Thomas, your number 1 back.
Reggie
Roby, yes. And again, Reggie Roby, receiver / gunner / kick returner. So, you know, he performed a multitude of roles. And that's how that again, it goes back to, how do you get a good kick returner? What do you do? Where do you sacrifice? And because the Saints like to have 4 and 5 running backs on the roster, one of those guys generally has to be a kick returner. You know, I think they were sort of hoping Trey Edmonds would kind of be that guy, and he didn't turn out to be your kick returner. I think he had trouble doing any kind of kick returning. They tried him a couple times in preseason. I think he ended up just being your 3rd back, and then they had a 4th back. We picked up what was his name? I can't think of his name. He never played a game. He was just a back they picked up, always inactive on game day. When they ran through the list of players, his name was always on there. And
I'm drawing a blank again.
Yeah, it's Anderson or something like that. He was a guy they picked up from Arizona. Let me just look at something real quick. Saints 2017 roster. That's the best part of I can Google while we're talking.
Well, while you Google that, let me ask you this.
Jonathan Williams was his name. Jonathan Williams.
Yeah. That's my son's name. Why couldn't I remember that?
I have no idea. He's a little old to be your son right now, but yeah, because he's 24 years old. So
that's only 3.5 years older than my son.
There you go. But yeah, he came from University of Arkansas, and that was the guy.
Yeah.
That was another guy who they brought in as a running back, but he didn't play. He wasn't a kick returner. So, that's what makes it hard to save that roster spot. It's easier to make him inactive and just keep him on the roster in case someone gets hurt.
Well, let me ask you this. Looking at things realistically, he's a dynamic playmaker when given the opportunity. He's one of those feel-good stories, but is Tommy Lee Lewis going to be that kick returner?
Hang on here. That takes care of that. I had something else open, one of the other tabs open. I thought Tommy Lee Lewis did a better job of not turning the ball over, not carrying the ball loose, but his size is such a disadvantage to be a kick returner because he's so small and so light. I don't know. I think he's on the roster again next year until, they unless they bring somebody else who can beat him out. It's hard. It's got to be somebody. If they draft a receiver, I think Tommy Lee Lewis is the one that's in the biggest amount of trouble. I don't think it's Snead or Coleman because they're both cheap, and they like what Coleman does in the running game, and they like what Snead did do in the passing game. So it's Tommy Lee Lewis is really fighting for his life. If they bring somebody else in, which I think they will. So his best hope is to be that special teams kick return guy to stay on the squad. So we'll see.
I agree. And we're going to get more into this later on. Someone asked me about a week ago who I thought the two most important free agents we had that we needed to re-sign, and also what two impending free agents did I see the Saints moving on from. And the two that I saw us moving on from were Kenny Vaccaro and Willie Snead. And it very easily could come down to a choice between Snead or Lewis, in my opinion.
Here's the thing about Snead. Snead's a restricted free agent. So, unless someone goes after him deliberately and signs him to an offer sheet, the Saints have 10 days to match anything, as long as they tender him something. And I can't imagine a team putting an offer sheet on a guy who caught 6 passes last year. So it's hard to say that Snead's really in trouble for his job unless the Saints don't tender him at all. And even then, I mean, he has a possibility he can just hang out there until whenever someone needs him. I think they tender him. I think they like him. The fact that Drew went to him on 4th down in that playoff game against the Vikings speaks a lot about him. They kept putting him out there. He wasn't inactive most of the season. I know people had this idea that Austin Carr could do something, and I think they just wanted to keep Austin Carr on the roster for this next season. Let's see a year in the system, a year learning. Let's see what you can offer and compete for a job. I don't think anything's handed to Snead, but he definitely can't struggle in preseason. He definitely can't. He has to keep his nose clean. So we'll see. I mean, a lot of people just want to kind of write players off in the offseason. Okay, well, he's not going to be here anymore, and they're going to let this guy go and let this guy go. I think the Saints want to bring in as many people as they possibly can for competition, and just let's see who the best guy is. I think Snead makes it all the way until training camp, unless something disastrous happens or someone just totally blows everybody away. I think he makes it through training camp, and we'll see where he falls at the end of the training camp, because they want to see that. They want somebody out there who Drew feels comfortable with pushing any new players they got.
I completely agree. We saw, not this past season, obviously, but we saw a year ago what Snead is capable of doing. Now, for whatever reason, he fell off the cliff this past year, and I think that was as much Sean Payton as it was Willie Snead. Probably equal parts of both factor into it. I wouldn't begin to speculate on where that ball would land, but if there's any possibility of salvaging anything of what Willie Snead was, obviously you've got to keep it.
Yeah.
Because what we saw out of Snead 2 years ago. Yeah, you're not gonna get the return on your investment with a high-priced free agent like Jarvis Landry, which he's not a free agent anymore. Let us lower the flag to half staff. Personal joke. You're not going to see for what you're putting into it. You're not going to see the level of production out of anyone better than you will Willie Snead, in my opinion.
And again, he's cheap. That's the thing that makes him stick. He's cheap. You don't have to go out there and break the bank for him. That saves you money that you could pay other players. So that's his biggest advantage at this point of the offseason. If this were, let's say Ted Ginn was struggling, okay, and Ted Ginn had a bad season, and Ted Ginn's got a sizable contract number compared to Snead, who's still playing for basically an NFL minimum number for a player who has under 4 years, accrued veteran experience. Then you could say, okay, well, the money doesn't justify his production. 6 passes from a guy who is making $250,000 a year, and I'm just throwing a number out there. I have no idea how much he really makes, but it's something like that. The Saints can live with that, because a receiver you go and sign right now is going to be more than $250,000 a year, and he hasn't caught a pass for you yet. So that's my point when it comes to Snead, and I think they're willing to be patient and see if we can get the 2016 Snead instead of what we saw in 2017. So that really, the business side really works into the way you fill your roster right now, especially the bottom half of your roster, because you're going to pay Drew Brees X amount. You're going to have to end up. You've got Cameron Jordan out there who's making a lot. You've got a lot of money that you paid for players like Warford, what you paid for Armstead. Even Streif's contract is still out there. He's still on the team. He's still costing you money. So the top half of your roster is going to be your expensive players, your veteran players, or players you brought in from free agency and paid a lot of money. So to make up for that, so you have a lot of cap space, is you've got to fill out the bottom half of your roster, a lot of cheap players. So you fill them out with rookies, guys working on undrafted free agent contracts like a Snead, like a Coleman. People can sit there and say, well, they're not very good. They're good enough based on what you are paying them. So that's how they stick. That's how they stick on the roster. When they become more expensive than what their production is, that's when you cut them loose. And right now, the way we've got this roster, because we have brought in so much undrafted and drafted players, you've got a pretty good core of cheap players. So it gives you more cap room. You start paying other guys to come in. You pay your better veterans and so forth. So,
well, what great it for me, the special teams was basically a tale of two cities, so to speak. You had the spectacular play of Lutz and Morstead, and then you had the on again and much more often off again return game. So what grade would you give the special teams as a whole on the season?
I would give the players we've talked about, I would give Lutz and Morstead both A's. I would give the special teams a C in general, because the lack of an impact kick return game until you brought Kamara in. Yes, we had a block punt that, two of them, in fact, if you count the one in the playoff game against the Vikings. But we gave up a little bit on returns, a little bit more than we should have. We had to bring in Mike Westhoff, I believe. I believe that's how you say his name. But we had to bring him in to kind of help. So you've had 3 coaches on special teams essentially this year. It's a work in progress. It's again what we were talking about before about your bottom half of your roster. That makes up the bulk of your special teams. And when you have a lot of players that are injured, you're constantly bringing in other guys to come in now who fill out those special teams positions. It makes it harder to field a consistent special teams performance. I thought Justin Hardy and Chris Banjo both were outstanding special teams guys. We need more guys like that. That's why I'm giving them a C, because from previous years it was D to an F. We are getting there. We're just not there yet. And I think once we find a consistent returner who is going to score or get the Saints constantly in good field position, that's when it's an A.
Okay. And there's not a whole lot that I can add to that. And in terms of off-season priorities, obviously, as you just alluded to, it's got to be finding someone that can consistently contribute in the kick return game. And if I had to select an MVP, I've gone back and forth on this all day between Lutz and Morstead, but call me sentimental. Morstead logging that one play at defensive tackle, that won me out. I got to give it to Thomas Morstead.
Yeah. I really didn't give it an MVP, but since you gave it to Morstead, I would give it to Lutz. I'm going to give it to him because, again, it's only because I expect this out of Morstead, okay?
Yeah.
Since 2009, he has done everything right. He has never had a down year. He really hasn't. If you think about this, you've never sat there and go, oh, God, he might shank this one. If he shanked you, like, what the hell happened? You're shocked. But
Morstead has had one punt blocked.
Yeah.
I can only, off the top of my head, I can only remember one that he ever had blocked.
Right. And we are talking about he is now entering his 10th year, because he came in 2009. So this is going to be his 11th year, actually, because they count that rookie year as a year. But this will be his 11th season. He was an outstanding kickoff guy. Lutz, very solid kickoff guy. He's putting in the end zone most of the time. He's, to me, it's just the consistency of the field goals. I mean, it doesn't matter where we are. You don't have to. If he kicks a 55-yard field goal, you're not going, oh, God, I hope he makes it. I hope he's got the leg strength for it. We don't get this bizarre shank going the other way, which I did see one time with Russell Erxleben years and years ago. This is the 1980 season. I kid you not. Goalpost is here, okay? Erxleben was a straight-on kicker. And for those of you who are under 25, that means a kicker lines up directly in front of the ball, and his leg is like a pendulum. He just kicks it forward, just like that old game you played when you were a kid, where you hit the top of the kicker's head, and his foot kicked the ball. That's a straight-on kicker, as opposed to the soccer style, which is at an angle, and they kick, soccer style. Well, goalposts are here. Erxleben's about an 18-yard field goal. I kid you not. The ball went that way. It never even went straight. It went that way. I'd never seen that before in my life. How do you do that as a straight-on kicker? How does the ball go that way? And he did a little pirouette and then collapsed on the ground and beat his hands on the turf and kicked his legs on the turf like he was 2. Oh, man. Don't get me started on that dude.
It's amazing to me every time I see one of those articles, the most hated players for all 32 franchises. Anytime they have one of those, it's always Russell Erxleben.
Well, because you used a first-round draft pick. Now, we picked Pete at 11. No, we picked Pete at 13. We picked Lattimore at 11. Can you imagine the outrage today if, with Lattimore or players like him on the board, the Saints take a kicker at 11 without having Lutz around? That is the kind of thing. I mean, you went 7-9 the season before in 1978. You went 7-9, and the only reason why you went 7-9 that season is because of 2 losses to the Atlanta Falcons. That's between being 9-7 and 7-9. You need help on your defense. You need a pass rusher. You need a defensive tackle, and you need, speed at linebacker because of the way the flex defense was played and all that. And you had crap cornerbacks back there. You needed a lot of help on your defense. And you take a kicker because he can kick and punt? No. You never do that. Don't talk to me about Ray Guy. I know about Ray Guy, but Ray Guy's the exception, And Janikowski, the Polish keg, that he's an exception. That was his nickname, the Polish powder keg, I think they used to call him.
He's now unemployed, by the way.
Yeah.
And Ray Guy sits alone in the Hall of Fame.
Right.
So,
right.
If Russell Erxleben had gone into the Hall of Fame, I guarantee you the narrative around his name would be different.
He didn't. The dude's in jail for fraud, okay? And it's not because he was pretending to be an NFL player. It was fraud because he had a pyramid scheme and was screwing over investors. So, yeah. He was so bad. How bad was he? He was so bad that's the Johnny Carson joke for those of you from don't remember that far back. That we brought in Garo Yepremian. Well, he was hurt, but we brought in Garo Yepremian in '79 to kick off and then do field goal kickers for us, and Rick Partridge to be the punter. And in 1980, after those 2 disaster kicks, they bring in Benny Ricardo to be a kicker for the Saints. I mean, this guy stunk too. Kickers in the 70s for the Saints, until we got Morton Anderson, kickers was like a who's who of bar guys who were on, we had kickers by the name of like Happy Fella, Charlie Durkee. We had Tom Dempsey, but you had all the Mick Myers I think they ever had in the history of the NFL. Mick Myers and the Zendejas families, I think their only job in life was a kick in the NFL, because it was like everybody had a Mickelmeyer and everybody had a Zendejas at one time or another back then. So, yeah, we've had, and Grammaticas too. That's what it was like. It's like every week, it's like, who the hell is that guy? Oh, that's another kicker we got. They fired this guy. And
I think it says a lot for the state of the position for the Saints that, unlike the previous 3 to 4 seasons, every Tuesday is not kicker tryouts.
No,
anymore.
Exactly. That was pretty close to what it was like in the 70s, except we had nothing else too. We were having kicker tryouts, running back tryouts, wide receiver tryouts. True story. In the media guide for, I think, the 1975 season, Archie's receivers dropped so many passes that they put this in the media guide. They said he suffered from drop balls. True story.
I don't know how to transition from that.
No, you don't. I could tell stories about the 70s Saints all night. I really could, because every day was an adventure. I kid you not, too. In the 70s, they had John Meekum used to be the owner of the Saints before he sold to Tom Benson in 1985. Okay, so they had a front page sports page in what we used to call in this journal the second coming headlines. Second coming headlines are, the fonts like this big, end of the world. Well, they said the question was, what's wrong with the Saints? And then it said 2 words, and then in very, very small print said John Meekum. And then even smaller print says an editorial. And it was like an entire page of shit. It was unbelievable, back then. But everybody knew it. It was just, he was the Dan Snyder before Dan Snyder was around. But Dan Snyder knew better how to run a football team than Meekum did. And just the decisions he would make.
Oh my God.
He's just mind-boggling. Oh, Meekum would have gone crazy if they had free agency in the 70s and the 60s.
Especially with no salary cap.
Right. The decisions he was making back then, when he put this team together, we went and we traded for Gary Quazzo. We signed Paul Hornung out of the expansion draft, and then we drafted. Well, we signed out of his option year contract. This is kind of confusing because, and we're getting way, way out of topic here, but back then, since there was no free agency, and I'm talking about this, in fact, right now, my little columns I'm throwing in the Under the Dome Facebook page, they had what was called Plan B from 89 and 92, which you left certain players unprotected. Well, in the 60s and in the 70s, early 70s, you had contracts where guys were playing their option year. And what that meant was that the owner or the parent club that has the rights to that player had the option of whether or not they were going to keep the player or just let him go. And other teams could sign a guy if they were willing to pay the price for the option of signing them. In other words, you had to give up something to get that guy. Well, John Meekum didn't play those rules. He signed Jimmy Taylor from Green Bay, ex-LSU player, won 5 championships with the Packers. He signs him on his option year. Green Bay doesn't get anything for him. Then he goes and signs Dave Parks, a big wide receiver, tight end wide receiver kind of guy from the San Francisco 49ers, signs him in his option contract. The 49ers didn't like that. They go complain to Pete Rozelle. Pete Rozelle said in 1968, okay, since you signed Dave Parks, you've got to give up your first-round draft pick to the 49ers. Well, the Saints had already drafted because back then the draft was held in January or February, around that time, because the Super Bowl was early January. The season didn't go this long. The playoffs were in December. They signed him they had the draft either the last week in January or the first week of February. And the Saints had drafted a guy by the name of Larry Hardy. So your first round draft pick, Pete Rozelle says, guess what? You're now property of the 49ers. Boom, there you go. Saints never saw him, never played. Fortunately, the Saints didn't know what the hell they were doing. Dick Schwenk was a general manager. He was a bust, so we basically got rid of a bust. But, that's the kind of things that Meekum was doing, so it made it a mess.
Well, we have a few dates that are notable coming up. February 13th, beginning at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, NFL clubs may begin to sign players whose CFL contracts have expired. Basically, that's saying that we can sign CFL players, and that's relevant for the Saints because we've made a regular practice with Delvin Breaux, Adam Big Hill, so on and so forth. That's February 13th. February 20th is the first day that teams can designate franchise or transition players.
We've seen that already.
February 27th through March the 5th will be the NFL Combine at Lucas Oil Stadium in Indy.
Let's hear it for the guys in underwear.
March 6th is the deadline for teams to designate franchise or transition players. And something that is going to be relevant for the Saints. March 12th through the 14th, clubs are permitted to contact or enter into contract negotiations with unrestricted free agents upon the expiration of their 2017 contracts at 4 p.m. Eastern Time on March 14th.
Yes.
Which basically means the league's 2017 season on March 14th at 4 o'clock Eastern Time comes to an end, and the 2018 season begins. And on March 14th, prior to 4 o'clock Eastern Time, clubs must exercise options for 2018 on all players who have option clauses in their 2017 contracts. Would that include Vaccaro?
No, Vaccaro, they already exercised their option. He's a fifth-year player.
I thought so.
Yeah, they exercised their option last year. Yeah, so the 14th, I believe, is Drew Brees' self-imposed deadline, where he'd like to get a deal done.
It says here that prior to 4 o'clock Eastern Time, clubs must submit a minimum salary tender to retain exclusive negotiating rights to their players with expiring 2017 contracts who have fewer than 3 accrued seasons of free agency credit.
Yeah, that's basically the restricted and exclusive rights free agents they're talking about there. That was Snead last year.
Is that not Snead this year?
Snead
he's still a restricted free agent.
He's restricted because he only had 3 years last year, so he was an exclusive rights. He's on his 4th year now, so he's a restricted free agent, much like how Malcolm Butler was last year. So you assign a tender, and it's based on how much you're willing to pay a guy, how much the tender is worth. So let's just say that the Saints put the highest possible tender on a guy, and I think that's a couple $1 million for a 2nd-round draft pick. I'm not exactly sure the dollar amounts, but that would be the highest amount. So essentially the Saints are saying, okay, we're willing to pay a guy for a season a couple $1 million, and if a club wishes to sign him, the Saints still have 10 days to match the deal, or they give up a draft pick. And last year, I think what they did was the New England Patriots put a 1st-round tender on Butler. So that's why the Saints couldn't sign him to an offer sheet. Because if you signed him to an offer sheet, then the Patriots can match it or ignore, let it go. And if they let it go, then we give up a 1st-round draft pick. So that's why we had to negotiate a trade if we were going to get him. So we couldn't sign him to an offer sheet. We had to sign him. We had to get the trade agreed upon. Then we could sign a contract with him. So that was why that discussion lasted all off season until the draft. And then once the draft happened, it sort of died away.
And April 26th through the 28th at Jerry's World AT&T Stadium, Arlington, Texas, will be the NFL Draft.
I didn't realize it was at Jerry's World.
Yes, indeed. for the next 2 years, I would imagine.
No, and I think probably, but I don't know.
As I'm introducing these relevant dates, I believe that means that April 24th is the big Draftapalooza extravaganza, Donnie Lambert Memorial pre-draft show that we do. We'll be doing a live first round mock with representatives from several different teams. Let's see, we'll be limited to 8, so we'll probably use the same format as what we used a year ago, where we had one person drafting for the entire division. And I'm really looking forward to it. We've already enlisted David Harrison, Jack Kopansky, Josh Schultz, just several guys that we had involved last year are excited to be a part of it again this year too.
It's a lot of fun, and I keep saying I'm gonna go back and watch the thing and write the names down as we did the picks. I thought I had it somewhere, but I guess I don't, because I want to see how close we were to the actual draft. I know we got most of the names right. We just obviously didn't get the order right. I'd like to see how close we were to matching a player with a team. So it's going to be fun. It's the first round only because we did 7 rounds. We'd be here on 6 hours. It's the first round only. So, and that's really the most important round as far as fans are concerned. We don't do trades. We pretend like this is going to be a straight shot. So, yes, I know on draft day, like last year, we had Buffalo trade down with Kansas City, and Kansas City moved up to take Patrick Mahomes. That's how we ended up with Marshawn Lattimore. We are going to go strictly from the standpoint of there's no trades. This is just 1 through 32. These are the picks. It's a lot easier to do that than to try and fight with trades and everything else. It's not worth it, especially since we're not doing rounds 2 and 3 and 4. So yeah, I can say I'm gonna go Mike Dicker on you. I'll trade my entire draft to move up to number 5 and take a guy. No, can do that kind of stuff. So, and 2 picks in the following year.
How'd that work out for you?
It's funny. It's one of the worst trades in Saints history, but at the same time, if you look at the fallout from that draft day trade, you compare that to, say, the Herschel Walker deal with the Cowboys. That built an empire for the Cowboys, a dynasty, I should say. You won 4 Super Bowls basically with that team, or 3 Super Bowls. Sorry, 3. 2 with Jimmy Johnson, 1 with Barry Switzer. Yeah. But the Redskins and the Bears, because the Bears got some of the picks because the Redskins had traded with them, really got nothing out of that trade if you look at it carefully. And the Saints got a 2-time 1,000-yard rusher. They went to the playoffs in 2000. Now, granted, with a new coach, new front office, everything else. And that our general manager at the time, Randy Mueller, was able to parlay Ricky Williams to 2 first-round draft picks for the next 2 years. So, did the Saints really lose on that draft day trade? It made for a horrible 1999 season, but if you look at long-term, you got stuff for Ricky Williams. You were able to have a good, successful player at Ricky Williams. And you fleeced the Dolphins. So, it's not a disaster. It's not a great trade. I would never want to do that again. But it's one of those where you sit there and go, well, how badly did the Saints do? And look at what the Redskins got. They got one guy out of that entire draft, if you think about it, because LeVar Arrington, was done within 3 seasons, I believe. You got Champ Bailey, and Champ Bailey, you ended up sending over to Denver for Clinton Portis. So you really didn't even benefit from Champ Bailey's Hall of Fame career. Denver benefited from Champ Bailey's Hall of Fame career more than the Redskins did. And the Bears got nothing. The Bears have nothing to show because that 2006 team was not built out of the draft picks that they got from Washington via New Orleans in 1999. So
I'll go you one better than that. I'm probably going to alienate some people by saying that Ricky Williams was not the absolute bane of the New Orleans Saints franchise the way that he has in large part been portrayed as being. And I say that because there's a lot of people based on what it cost the Saints to get Ricky Williams that have held him, basically kind of held him accountable for that. That's not Ricky Williams' fault. The one thing that I can remember is on draft day, Ricky Williams went down. He slipped and he slipped and he slipped. And they had a camera like right here on his face when they announced the New Orleans Saints choose Ricky Williams. And just as clear as day, he turned around and looked at the guy standing next to him and said, "What in the hell?"
Yeah.
But, Ricky Williams was not the worst running back that the Saints ever had. They got...
No, far from it. No, not at all.
But because of all the mitigating circumstances around how he came to be a New Orleans Saint, he will always be overly criticized, in my opinion.
Well, I remember I was listening to the radio on draft day back then. I had it on ESPN, but I was also listening to WWL radio, and I was living in Lafayette at the time. But I can remember Mike Detillier, when the Colts selected Edgerrin James, you heard Mike Detillier say, "That seals the deal. The trade's going to go through. Ricky Williams is coming to New Orleans." Now, in 2006, when the Saints got Reggie Bush, it was this huge roar. People loved it and everything else. Well, people were like that in 1999 when the Saints made the trade for Ricky Williams because he was sold as the next Earl Campbell, okay? And not the Earl Campbell, of course, that we got. The Earl Campbell that the Houston Oilers had in 1978 and 79 of the Love You Blue era. So people were excited. People were really anxious for that 1999 season because if any team was supposed to make the next step forward, it was going to be that 1999 Saints team, which, of course, it turned out to be a complete disaster. Everything about that was bad about the team was exposed. From Billy Joe Herbert always getting hurt to, you have no true starting quarterback. You've got a great offensive line. You had Rofe. You had Wally Williams, who was good, not great. Jerry Fontenot, very solid center. You had Chris Naioli, who was a first-round draft pick in Dicker's first draft in 97. Then you had Kyle Turley. So you had three number ones. Turley, number 1 in 98. Rofe, number 1 93. And Naioli, number 1 97. So you had three number ones in offensive line, all built to run the football. So I can see where the optimism was coming from. You had Andre Hastings and Keith Poole as your receivers. You brought in Eddie Kennison from the Rams, who was going to be a kick returner / speed guy, and he ended up not being good at either one. So you thought you could kind of do and you had a good, not great defense. It needed a lot of work, but you had a Joe Johnson, you had a Mark Fields, you had Mark Fields, you had Leroy Glover, who was starting to develop as a sack master. Sammy Knight was on the back end. Your cornerbacks were weak, but you had something where you could at least hope to win 8 games and build from there. And of course, all the weaknesses were exposed. Dicker's terrible coaching. Danny Abramowitz is way over his head. I mean, it just Billy Joe Herbert, when he got hurt in in the 49ers game. I think it was when he was going for, they were like third or fourth and goal on the 49ers one, and he tried to sneak the ball in, and he went head first and jammed his neck, and he hurt his neck, and then he hurt his, I think he hurt his calf muscle, and he was never healthy from that point on. It's like the season just took completely unraveled in that 49ers game. I think that was week 2 or week 3. So, I mean, you know, this is a lot of Saints history for people who don't really care to relive those years. But, I mean, the point was, it wasn't Ricky Williams' fault. Ricky Williams did the best he could with a high ankle sprain his rookie year, and you saw the following year, once you had Hazlitt in, Jeff Blake at quarterback, Joe Horn at receiver, you know, you put some talent around Ricky Williams, much better talent than when he had in 1999. You saw 10-16 with a great defense that won a first playoff game. And Ricky Williams, even though he got hurt that year, you know, you saw a better back than what you saw in 1999, where he was all there was to that offense.
I agree. Let me ask you this. We're going to kind of close on this one. And as we've said, I know that free agency has almost gotten upon us, and the draft prognostication is in full swing elsewhere. We're going to let this play out, and we're going to wait, and we're going to do our homework, and we're going to bring you intelligent, informed opinions on these things. We're not going to jump hip deep into it right now. But that being said, the question that I alluded to earlier in the show, Alan, let me ask you this. Mm-hmm. If there are 2 free agents that you see the Saints losing, or excuse me, not necessarily losing so much as going in a different direction from, and 2 that you see as must re-signs, who would those be?
Well, the first free agent I think we're going to lose is going to be Kenny Vaccaro, because I just don't think, we talked about this before when we graded the safeties, I think with Marcus Williams and Von Bell in there, I think they're willing to let Vaccaro walk, because their attitude is, I can go find a safety who can do a lot of the same things Vaccaro can do either in the draft or in free agency. A second free agent, I really couldn't tell you, honestly, because I think if we lose someone else, it's going to be by the Saints' choice. Just like I think the Vaccaro thing will be the Saints' choice. Obviously, the free agent we're not going to lose, we're going to keep, is going to be Drew Brees. That's just a no-brainer.
That was mine.
Sorry. And yeah, we were going to talk about it, and I think we need to talk more about it once free agency opens and we see what kind of offers he gets. But I think the potential Kirk Cousins deal is going to be one of the last factors that affects the Drew Brees contract. Because first, I think Cousins is going to be the highest paid player in the NFL. I think that was the screen I had up earlier, and then somehow TV or some kind of audio came on during it. But you know, Matthew Stafford right now is what, $27 million a year. That's about what his contract is playing out to be. That's not his cap figure. That's just what his contract plays out to be, a $27 million a year deal. I think Cousins hits $30 million or a little bit more a year. I think that's the kind of deal he's going to sign. Drew is at $24 million right now. He's $18 million towards the cap, but he's $24 million is how much he made last year. So I think Drew is looking for something between 24 and 30. I think that's where he's going to go. But if Cousins' deal is more than 30, I think that opens up a little bit more to where Drew's ceiling is. That makes sense?
Yeah.
Yes. His floor is what he made this year, $24 million. His ceiling is going to be determined based on what Cousins makes. Now, here's the hard part about working at this deal is Cousins, you can sign to a 5-year deal because of his age, and you can spread his cap impact out for a long time. You can push much of it as you can towards the last couple of years of his deal to protect you in case he turns out to be a bust, but also because he's a young enough player, you can do that. You can't do that with Breeze. You're looking at a 2 to 3 year deal max. So if he's making $27 million, let's just say that's the number, $27 million this year, you can make his cap figure as low as 18 to 17 because you can push his bonuses off to the end of the year. You're going to have to do at least a 3-year deal at that. And then you may have to push his cap impact, the full cap impact, that 4th year, the year he's no longer on the team, so you have dead money now for a player who's not on the roster. So that's going to be that's the part that Loomis has to work on. It's not whether or not we're going to re-sign Drew. It's how do we get the money Drew wants, because he's going to get it all up front anyway. But how do I spread the cap impact out over 2, 3 years, maybe a 4th year, so I'm not killing myself once Drew's gone? And I think that's the challenge. And I think Cousins sets the stage for that. How do they do Cousins' deal? Let's see what they do with Drew. But I think they will work something out, and we'll see how this goes. It's going to be some creative math, though. I'll tell you that.
I don't see it as being the same situation, really. I understand what you said, and I agree with what you said. But comparatively speaking, the simplest way that I know to look at it, Cousins is going to have more productivity beyond this contract than what Breeze will, because chances are probably 90 as high as 90 to 95% that once this deal expires on Breeze, he's done. His career is over, and Cousins will not be. But at the same time, you're dealing, if everything plays out the way that it's looking as far as the narratives in the media go, you're looking at a very, very desperate New York Jets team that is willing to roll the dice on being completely guaranteed contract in Cousins, which I would.
That's insane. You can't do that.
As my grandmother used to say, you'd rather sandpaper the hair off a Wildcat's butt in a telephone booth than do that. I don't see that turning out well. Not for a New York franchise. The bar is just too high. And on top of that, you're competing in an NFC East division that includes Tom Brady and Bill Belichick until they choose to otherwise alter that. I think it's way, way, way too high a risk, and I'm hoping that people are misinformed about that. I wish Cousins nothing but the best, but for him to get that high a contract and for it to be 100% guaranteed, I really and truly inside of me, I feel like that's going to be very bad for the game.
Well, you're going to devastate the franchise, because if you're wrong, if he doesn't perform or God forbid gets hurt and is done, you've just set your franchise back. It's worse than a draft pick, a first-round draft pick you've blown. You set your franchise back 5 to 6 years. And for a franchise like the Jets, who have been looking for consistent relevance, and we're just going to skip over the Bill Parcells years. Let's just say they're a franchise looking for consistent relevance since the days they were in the AFL with Joe Namath. That is that's just, you can't. You're trying too hard to get a Hail Mary player, and it's just not going to happen. It just isn't. You don't have enough talent around the Jets to win, to say, okay, I'm one player away, and I can throw all this money to this one player. Because the rumor has it that Muhammad Wilkerson is out in the Jets organization. So how are you going to justify giving a fully guaranteed contract to a Kirk Cousins when you got really not much at receiver? You've got some okay backs at running back. You've got an offensive line that you are slowly assembling to be a good, and then your defense is just falling apart. You need too many. It's Mike Dicker all over again. You've got too many holes that you have to fill. You need to have, the Jets would need to have a 2016 and 2017 draft that the Saints had just to start, and then start looking at a Cousins player. Because you're not there. You're far away from that right now. No team is one player away from being a Super Bowl contender. I don't care who it is. Even Jacksonville is not one player away from a Super Bowl championship, because you're counting on too many components to do exactly what they did the year before. And you're counting on too many things to go just right. Part of winning the Super Bowl is being lucky, or getting lucky bounces at certain times of the year. Games that you're supposed to lose that you end up winning. And I'm thinking about in 2009, the Washington game, the Miami game, even the Atlanta game, the second Atlanta game. Those are games that the Saints should have lost, but still won, in 2009. And you look at the Carolina Panthers will say the same thing about their run. Atlanta can say the same thing about their run. If you go back and look at certain games, you steal certain wins because you get certain bounces. It's hard to get that perfect team together because so many factors depend on guys having all-pro or all-star years you never expected to have, and that kind of stuff. So to try and set that up by saying, okay, I get this one guy and that's it, I can make a run, it's just not going to happen. It really isn't.
I don't see it happening in New York, because for the duration of the preseason and during training, these guys were in fire sale mode just about. The guy that they I'm drawing a blank right off the top of my head. I can't remember the guy that they shipped off to Seattle.
Sheldon Richardson.
Yeah, Sheldon Richardson. The cancer of the franchise, as they put it.
Yeah.
But you're talking about, in terms of Kirk Cousins, you're trading one bad franchise for another.
Yeah.
Because there's really not a significant improvement from what he has with the Redskins now and what he's going to in New York, except for the exponentially larger paycheck.
Right. But, Cousins couldn't lead Washington. What makes you think he can lead the Jets, given what they've got?
Yeah. That was my point. I don't see it happening.
Cousins would do better to go to a team like Denver, where, they may pay him more, but he is not seen as the savior. He is somebody seen to stabilize a position, but you've got other things that you've got to do to win. That's the difference. Okay. You just want to stabilize the position. And that's what makes you, that's how you build a winner. You don't put all your eggs in this one guy's basket and say, okay, that's it. Now we're going to go.
I get ridiculed all the time because when it comes to quarterbacks, I basically lump them into three categories. You have your everyday guys, which are just the guys that line up on Sunday. Mm-hmm. And then you have your generational players, your Breeze, your Brady, your Manning, your Montana, your Bradshaw, those Marino, Elway, those guys. And then you're going to have your transitional guys, your guys that come after Drew Brees and get you to the next franchise guy or the next transitional guy.
Woodstruck.
Well, yeah.
David Woodley and Don Strock. Well, David Woodley and Don Strock was your transitional between Bob Greasy and Dan Marino. Woodstruck.
Yeah.
So, you need. Here's the thing: you've got to figure out what works for your offense, what works for your team. Drew Brees works for the Saints offense because the offense is designed around what Drew Brees does. You take a team like trying to figure out a good one. You take a team like let's say Minnesota Vikings, okay? Minnesota could go forward because while Case Keenum was the quarterback and was a trigger man for the offense, it wasn't incumbent upon him to win the game for you. He just had to make enough plays to get the scores, but the defense will win the game for you. Okay? So you have a quarterback who fits with what you're trying to do. The weakness of a Case Keenum, though, was if the defense couldn't win the game for you, he needed to make plays. He couldn't make the plays.
Blake Bortles.
Blake Bortles is another one. Okay. If you try and get a franchise quarterback and put it in Jacksonville's offense, it's not going to work because the offense isn't incumbent upon the quarterback making the plays to win the game. They need a quarterback who can manage the game, but if they are falling behind and need someone to make important throws, that's when he needs to be able to step up and make those throws. So you need not a Drew Brees, but you could use an Eli Manning, for example. Eli Manning would fit in much better than a Kirk Cousins because Kirk Cousins is the kind of guy right now that you're trying to get into a system where you need a quarterback who stabilizes position and can make plays by pushing the ball downfield when he wants to, not when he has to. And Jacksonville would be when you have to, because Jacksonville is going to run the ball on first down, run the ball on second down, and hopefully run the ball on third down too. That's their philosophy. That's their offensive scheme.
Throw the ball on third down because they called the wrong play in the huddle.
Yeah. You throw the ball on third down because it's 3rd and 5 and 3rd and 7, not because it's 3rd and 2. Whereas in Denver, if you put a quarterback like a Cousins in Denver, whether it's 3rd and 2 or 3rd and 7, they're going to throw the ball because you've got the receivers, you've got the offensive scheme, you've built a team around a quarterback who's going to throw the ball, but you don't rely on him solely to win the game for you like you would a Tom Brady, a Drew Brees, a Matt Ryan, those kind of guys, because those offenses are dependent on an all-star coming in and winning the game. That's kind of the difference that I see in offenses. So,
well, that whole diatribe I went into earlier about the 3 phases of quarterbackhood.
Mm-hmm. No, you're right. You're right on them.
I see Kirk Cousins as being a glorified transitional quarterback. And that I don't take anything away from the guy. I was amazed, especially in that Saints-Redskins game this year that I rewatched on Friday night on the NFL Network. I was amazed at the things that he did, the throws that he made, the reads that he made, the decisions that he made on the spot, just right there, boom, boom, boom. But, when the game hung in the balance, he turned around and threw it to the side judge.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, he is a guy who's not ready to take that next step. He needs to go to a system and a coach who can work with him to take that next step. Washington clearly is not. They couldn't even commit to the guy, which is amazing to think about because of the problems Washington's had with quarterbacks throughout their history. Beyond.
I think we're going to get somewhere beyond all of this, and we're going to find out that there was much more to that story. I sincerely believe.
There's got to be. No one does. No one.
Like you just said, as dire as the situation is in Washington for a franchise guy for them, ever since Robert Griffin proved to not be that one, and they got him, for them to turn their back on that, there's got to be more to the equation than that.
Yeah. I mean, because you have not had, and this is going to really shock people, but you have not had as a passer, you have not had a franchise quarterback in Washington since the days of Sonny Jurgensen. You
wouldn't consider Theismann?
Oh, hell no. No. Theismann will. Theismann will be the first one to tell you how great he is. But no, I mean, because Joe Gibbs' system, Theismann turned around and handed off to John Riggins. That was his job, 70 chip, okay? And when you got Riggins behind you, that opens up a lot of things for your offense with the Smurfs and everything else. But the fact that Joe Gibbs won a Super Bowl with Theismann, he won a Super Bowl with Doug Williams. Well, no, he won. He didn't. He went Doug Williams. I'm talking about his wins. Doug Williams, and then he won one with Mark Rippon. Tells you his system was set up for a quarterback to be successful in it. You didn't have to have a franchise quarterback. And prior to that, throughout the 70s, with George Allen in the Redskins, George Allen licking his fingers and the whole bit. Oh, my mom used to drive my mom crazy to watch George Allen. 40 men together can't lose. You had Billy Kilmer and Sonny Jurgensen. I mean, and yeah, Kilmer ran the offense, but it was really a defensive team, the Over the Hill Gang, and it was a lot of running the football. Kilmer played like a street fight kind of quarterback, but it wasn't the finesse, beautiful passing game that you saw in the 80s, okay, once you had Joe Gibbs there. So, I mean, yeah, you have to go back to the Sonny Jurgensen era, the 60s and the 70s, early 70s, to really find an elite passer with the Washington Redskins. So, yeah, I agree with you, and we've gone way over time here, but I agree with you. There's got to be more to this story than what we know for the Redskins not to want to keep Cousins, to make a trade for Alex Smith before free agency officially starts because you're ready to push Cousins out the door. That's just, there's something else going on there.
Well, now they've basically signed away their lives as far as that goes, because they've already traded for. Did they trade or did they just sign Smith?
They had to trade for him.
Okay, so you got your replacement in house, so. Mm-hmm. I would feel reasonably safe in assuming that his locker is cleaned out.
Yeah, and Smith is older. Smith's the same age as Aaron Rodgers, because they both came out the same draft.
It always amazes me how people can so easily buy, and this is going to be another subject for another time, how easily so many people can buy into, well, Drew Brees is a free agent. The Cleveland Browns are willing to throw this pile of money at him, and that makes him an instant Super Bowl contender. No, it doesn't.
No.
Alex Smith going to Denver or to Washington, or Kirk Cousins going to Jacksonville, that doesn't make any of them an instant Super Bowl favorite. Because a lot of teams, Brees, if you don't have Drew Brees with Sean Payton, you're not going to see the same results. You don't have Tom Brady with Bill Belichick, you're not going to see the same results.
It's about finding fits. You got to find a fit.
That's right.
Who fits what you're trying to do, and that's the whole key of having a successful free agency. I've seen too many times the NFL Network and websites all over talk about who won the offseason. That at the end of May, no one won anything. It's just some crap that they want to throw out there just to write. Nobody wins the offseason because you don't know until they actually start playing the games who wins what offseason, because it's about finding guys who fit what you're trying to do philosophically. And you're not picking free agents out because they did great in another system. You can't look at it that way. You have to look at it from the standpoint of, how would this guy work in our system? And sometimes the most coveted guys don't work in your system. That was my point when I did the thing about Jarius Byrd. Great guy in Buffalo, didn't fit in our system, and got injured a lot. So you've got to find guys who fit. And that's the trick for Cousins. All right, guys, we went way over time. Thank y'all for sticking with us. Got a little Saints history as well as some of our feelings about free agency. This time next week will be the 28th. The 27th. We will be 1 week away from free agency. We'll have some more stuff to talk about because I'm sure the rumors are going to fly big time. The self-imposed Drew Brees deadline will be a week closer, so we can talk some more about that. And we'll talk about some free agents that we think the Saints should look at, kind of like a free agency preview of guys that I think the Saints should look hard at. And some of them are going to be guys y'all have never heard of. But if you think about a guy like Joe Horn, you think about a guy like Leroy Glover, you think about even a
Drew
guy
Brees.
like Craig Rob. Well, no, you heard of Drew Brees, but like a guy like Craig Robertson, guys that you're like, yeah, we sign them. Maybe they might play a good backup. No, they actually contribute a lot in the season. That's the kind of guys I think we're looking for. What's that?
Scott Fujita.
Scott Fujita, yeah. Scott Shanley, even.
Keenan Allen. Never mind.
So we'll talk some more about that next week. And until next time, thank you guys for joining us in Under the Dome. We'll see you next time. Good night, everybody.
Thank you, guys. Love y'all.